Thanks, Stuart. And the after lunch slump is real. So I'm going to welcome everybody to put their arms in the air. Keep going. Still a little bit more. Okay. Get the blood flowing. And I'm also going to ask, does anybody in the room have Merlin on their phone? Okay. How about one person at each table? Actually, if you have Merlin, open it up, and I'm going to ask you to get the call for the American Redstart open. I'll give you just a second to do that. And don't get distracted looking at anything else on your phone. American Redstart. Yes, that call. Okay, we've all heard it now. I guess we blew the thing earlier, but okay. Please cease the American Redstart calls. Okay, hello everyone. I'm Ann Calhoun. I work with the Nature Conservancy in Wisconsin, and I'm really excited to be here today with you, sharing research that's occurring in the Baraboo Hills. The Baraboo Hills are a really special place, a place that I care really passionately about, and I will note that much of this research was conducted by Dr. Maya Pershey. She could not be here to present. Maya and I actually did a webinar through the Oak Woodlands and Forest Fire Consortium about a year and a half ago, and Joe Marshall reached out to Maya about giving a presentation here. She is deep in the woods of the Baraboo Hills, doing a lot of bird banding right now. I just talked to her last night. And so I am presenting this in partnership with her, and I just wanted to give acknowledgement that she's the person that really did the majority of the research, and I was really involved with her on the front end of it and designing and really thinking about how we tailor that research to meet our management goals. So and today's focus is really thinking about how we integrate that into our stewardship actions on the ground. So we'll start with some depressing stuff. There was a paper that came out in 2019 about widespread bird declines in North America since the 1970s, and another recent paper that really shows declines are accelerating in certain hotspots, and the Midwest is one of those hotspots that shows up strongly for bird decline, and the red area on the map on the left really is showing, you can see right where we are in the upper Midwest, that area of red. And it really I noticed a little bit of feedback earlier today. I don't know what it's from. Okay, if it's not too bad, I'll just keep going. So in the red area, a lot of that decline is attributed to intensive agriculture. So these are themes that have come up several times today in terms of agriculture and some other things that are really affecting forests of the region. Something else could really be at play here as well, and these two maps show the abundance of obligate eastern forest bird species. The red colors indicate annual declines, and blue colors indicate annual increases. And you'll note on the left, the disturbance-dependent species that show up in red are facing much more extensive declines than other species in the Midwest. And I can tell there are a few bird nerds in the room with the number of Merlin app installations, but acknowledging that there might be some people that are not as familiar with birds, when we're talking about disturbance-adapted eastern forest obligates, these are species with breeding ranges entirely within the eastern forest, which also depend on forests with intact disturbance regimes. So really thinking about species that need those forests and have the disturbance regimes that they need. And this really brings up, so some of those species are represented on the slide. That's by no means all of them, but some that people might be familiar with. And it really brings up a conservation responsibility for us as we're thinking about stewarding these places into the future. So we got a really great intro earlier today from Greg Nowacki about oak ecosystems managed with fire, and we've built on that today. So I won't rehash that again. I will say that a lot of what Greg presented in his opening presentation is what we're implementing on some Nature Conservancy sites in the Baraboo Hills. So really targeted thinning and repetitive prescribed fire. Often the thinning is done before the burning, and then we're now in many of our restoration units where we're in many cases, 3 to 4 burns on those sites now. So it's really great to be getting repetitive fire onto those sites. And this research is really tailored towards thinking about understanding the bird and soundscape responses to that. So a little bit of landscape context for where I'm talking about in the world. The Baraboo Hills are nestled in the southern portion of Wisconsin. And if you look at them on, say, Google Earth, they stand out as a really distinct block of forest amongst an otherwise agricultural landscape. So the forests that really blanket the Baraboo Hills. And the Baraboo Hills are a really unique geologic landform. I guess I'll also note that. So they have a unique underlying quartzite. But the forests, they are quite extensive compared to the rest of the region, and these are regionally really important for forest interior birds. So we have some really specific forest interior birds that utilize these forests that have rather insufficient habitat in a lot of other places. So keeping that in mind as we're conducting our management. The ecological history of this area is very similar to throughout the Midwest. The social, cultural, ecological history is very similar to many other places in that there was indigenous fire that was frequent and widespread, extensive logging after colonial settlement, along with wildfires in some cases up until the 40s, and then grazing in many cases in a lot of the sites that we're now stewarding for oak, where grazing kind of served as a surrogate and held those sites in more open oak for many decades. And so there's also the impacts of grazing on the vegetative community that, you know, is somewhat unknown, but part of the picture. So as I noted, I'm here presenting a bunch of research that Maya Pershey conducted, and Maya is a fixtural part of what is the Baraboo Hills Ecology Research Collective. It's a really unique group, and they started in 2024, building off of Maya's PhD research, which started in 2021. And we've really worked in close collaboration with them on monitoring effects, covering a wide range of species, and to follow actively managed sites through time. The goal of the collective, so I am not part of the collective, I work for the Nature Conservancy, but the collective, we really work in close collaboration. And their goal is to really monitor ecological change and inform land stewardship efforts, both locally and across a wider region. And the monitoring work has really focused especially on songbirds, insects, vegetation phenology, and microclimates, which we have some really distinct microclimates in the Baraboo Hills still due to the geology. So in this image, you can see an area on the top. So this is actually one large pano picture, but we split it up. So on the top is representative of what's an unmanaged area looks like in the Baraboo Hills. And on the bottom image, you can see after thinning, and I believe this picture was taken when maybe 1 or 2 prescribed burns had been implemented on the site. This site's now seen, I think, 4. The data and research that I'll be sharing after this was collected in paired study sites. Each managed site was matched with an unmanaged site. So there will be several graphs where we talk about the paired managed and unmanaged sites. And those had really similar, we really tried to match them up with as similar of conditions as possible, including topography, geology, site history, and the landscape context. And that really allowed in this research to isolate the effects of woodland management as much as possible. The treatments that the Nature Conservancy implemented on these sites, I'd say in generalities, is removing a lot of shade-tolerant species, 6 inches and smaller. And that was mostly done non-commercially. And a lot of that material was left to rot, or in some cases left standing dead and then slowly fell down over time. And then that's followed by repetitive prescribed fire. There have been a few cases where we have gone back and then done some subsequent thinnings and continued reducing shade in a few sites. Really trying not to do it all at once and shock the system, thinking about doing that a little bit more gradually over time. So I noted I'm presenting data on Maya's behalf. I just want to say that a lot because I did not do this research. So kudos to her. The first set of data that I'll be summarizing is flying insect biomass, which was collected using malaise traps. That's the funky tent thing on the left in the picture. And by monitoring caterpillar biomass on understory leaves using visual surveys. So we all know insects are a really critically important foundation of terrestrial food webs. And Maya shared with me in prepping for this that 96% of North American land birds feed insects to their young during nesting season. I just did not know that it was that high. So 96% of land birds utilize insects when they're rearing their young. I will also note that the visual surveys that Maya and team did on leaves, they had like a small ruler and they measured the length of the caterpillars and then they used equations to like understand the volume of that biomass. So incredibly tedious work, but super cool in the data sets that it's created. Next, they conducted point counts during songbird nesting season. So right now, it's a critical time for that. And did that doing auditory surveys, and then that data was used to calculate abundance, so the territory density, really thinking about how many territories there are out there in some of these sites, and then the richness, so how many, the number of species utilizing each site. And then lastly, incorporating bioacoustic audio recorders. The sound for these sites was collected continuously at all the sites. And I will be using the word soundscape throughout the rest of the presentation, and that really refers to the entire collection of sound at a site or the entire sound envelope. And this can include sounds made by mammals, by wind, by rain, in many cases human-created sounds. And there's a lot of that in the world. It's actually really interesting having these recorders embedded out in pretty rural places and the amount of human-generated sound that we still hear. You'll see in the Baraboo Hills study area, like many places in the Midwest, birdsong really dominates the soundscape during early summer. So we'll be seeing that here shortly. So Maya has generated several really neat publications. I actually totally forgot there's a research brief out at the Oak Woodlands and Forest Fire Consortium table on some of the soundscapes work that I'm actually not highlighting today. So grab a copy of that if you're interested. It's out there. It says soundscapes on it. So today I'll be talking about the results of the insect, bird, and the bioacoustic surveys, and these results are published in 3 different research articles, and Maya did a great job of tagging which publication those are associated with on the following slides, so if anything interests you, you can tag out which publication that might come from. And there will be a QR code at the end where you can also catch the collective's webpage where all these publications are available. So let's get down with some caterpillar data. I am impressed. This group's been digesting a lot of graphs today, so I was a little like, how are graphs going to go over after lunch? I'm feeling okay about it. I think you guys can do this. In the graphs, I'll be showing all the managed site data will be represented in the brown or reddish color, and then the unmanaged sites data will be represented in blue. So just keep that in mind as we're going through the graphs. First, looking at just caterpillar biomass on the foliage understory, we can see in this graph that there's a lot of overlap between the managed and unmanaged site. But the takeaway is that if you look at the red star, which is the mean caterpillar biomass, it was a clear signal that managed sites had higher caterpillar biomass than unmanaged sites. And then in temperate habitats, caterpillar biomass has a strong seasonality to it, with a peak occurring in late spring and early summer, a few weeks after leaf out, so essentially like right now, and in terms of time of year. And in managed sites, we can see the peak, so that's that larger peak in the red, which might be a little hard for y'all to see, I realize. That's occurring earlier, a little bit earlier, and it has a greater magnitude and it extends for a little bit longer length of time. So we think that this is associated with higher oak dominance in the managed sites because of the amount of oak that's held in those places, and because oaks support such an incredible diversity of insects that could attribute to a lot of that arc in that curve. And one thing I wanted to note on this slide is I think many people have probably heard this, but it's a almost mind-blowing statistic. So a clutch of eggs, or to raise a nest of chicks or a clutch of chicks, it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise that nest of chicks from when they hatch to when they fledge the nest. So just really thinking about the amount of caterpillar biomass out there that needs to go be foraged and brought back to the nest and fed to their chicks. So just incredibly foundational parts of the food web. Then as we switch to thinking about flying insect biomass, so stuff that was caught in the Malays traps, this is also an important food resource for a lot of aerial insectivores, think flycatchers, things that catch food on the wing, and many warbler species. So we found that flying insect biomass in the understory was consistently around 50% higher in managed sites than in unmanaged sites. So now that we know a little bit about food resources in the form of insects, and that they're higher in managed sites than in unmanaged sites, and knowing that 95% of songbirds are insectivores during nesting season, we'll look at how this is reflected in the bird community. So on this graph, on the left is the managed sites, so those are red dots. Those might be hard to see where you're at. Each dot represents the number of bird species in one study. So on the left in the managed sites, that ranges from above 40 to lowest numbers just above 30. And then in the unmanaged sites, the numbers for those were about 33 to close to 20. And again, these, and the line connecting them, those were the paired sites. So the managed site paired with the unmanaged site. And we found that there were more bird species, so more overall species richness, in managed sites than in unmanaged sites across each one of the site comparisons. In the managed sites, there were also more disturbance-dependent species overall, more habitat specialists, so the red-headed woodpecker, cerulean warblers, mourning warblers, things, species like that, that kind of have specific niches. And then in most cases, interior forest specialist species persisted. And that was definitely a consideration when we were thinking about doing all of this management in these sites over time. So Maya and crew examined data of the 21 most abundant songbirds in the study area and found that 10 species were more abundant in managed sites. And this group included disturbance-adapted species. That was the species I mentioned at the very beginning, we had the photos of. And those are also declining especially fast in the Midwest, so a group of species to be mindful of. Another group, so this is looking at the 21 species. So that first group, the second group was 7 out of 21 that were equally abundant in managed and unmanaged sites. And then the third group was 4 out of 21 species that were less abundant in managed sites. And we think this is likely due to some specific forest habitat associations. Species like ovenbird need ground cover and things like that that's absent after fire. So episodic needs that those species just kind of show up and disappear a little bit more quickly. So now that we have an understanding of the insect and bird responses to management, let's get into the bioacoustic results. There are 2 major ways to analyze continuous soundscape information, and in this case, we're going to look at a spectrogram. And Maya has published several things on soundscapes, and today I'm just going to talk about acoustic complexity index. So the acoustic complexity index can be indicated by the squiggle that you see on this purple. This is a spectrogram of what a sound blurb is. And they higher complexity values versus low complexity. And then with all this in mind, we can look at the seasonal acoustic complexity index pattern in the study area. And the day of the season is on the x-axis and the value is on the y-axis. So think about higher complexity, things are going to be graphed a little bit higher. And then dun, 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 take all of that soundscape data, have it mapped on here, and we have the ACI and managed sites. So those are the brown vertical lines showing up with really distinct seasonal peaks. And we're also seeing that that is something that really jumps out on this graph, is the soundscapes tend to be much more complex in managed sites than in unmanaged sites, especially during June and early July, which is during peak bird nesting season. I'm actually going to skip this graph just for sake of time. And in summary, if you take anything away from this talk, just wanted to share that compared to unmanaged sites, managed sites have higher insect biomass. So that resulted in more caterpillars and more flying insects. We found more songbird species and more disturbance-adapted species in managed sites. Also equal or higher abundance of 17 of the 21 most common songbirds. And bird community as well described by the complexity of the soundscape. And then in managed sites had more complex soundscapes with more pronounced seasonality and those diurnal patterns throughout the day. So higher insect biomass, higher bird abundance, and more complex soundscapes. I am happy to chat more outside of the presentation about how we integrate this into our stewardship, but just really wanted to share, like, this is really profound research that we integrate into adaptive management on these sites. And one could talk about that for many hours. And want to say a huge thank you for hanging on after lunch. And the QR code for the Baraboo Hills Research Collective is up here, and happy to share that with folks. Maya is doing some really amazing research, so check it out.